The maintenance tunnels beneath Station Kepler 442 hummed with the constant vibration of life support systems. Engineer Sarah Chen crawled through the narrow access way, her scanner beeping steadily as she tracked down the source of the power fluctuations that had been plaguing Level 7 for the past 3 weeks. The cramped space forced her to move slowly, her tool belt scraping against the metal walls with each forward motion. The multi-species research station housed over 3,000 beings from 47 different worlds, all working together on the most ambitious scientific project in galactic history. The Harmony Project aimed to create a universal translation matrix that could bridge not just languages, but the fundamental thought patterns of different species. It was groundbreaking work, but it also meant that the station's infrastructure had to accommodate wildly different environmental needs. Sarah had been working on Kepler 442 for 8 months now, maintaining the complex web of systems that kept everyone alive and comfortable. She took pride in her work, knowing that every successful repair meant smoother cooperation between species that had never imagined working together before. The humans were relatively new to galactic civilization, having been discovered only 15 years ago, but their technical adaptability had quickly earned them respect. The scanner's beeping grew more urgent as she rounded a corner in the tunnel system. According to her readings, the power drain was somewhere ahead, in a section that should have been completely empty. The blueprints showed nothing but support struts and emergency power conduits in this area. Sarah frowned, checking her scanner again. The power draw was definitely there, but it was irregular, almost organic in its pattern. She emerged from the tunnel into a wider maintenance area, one of the larger spaces designed for equipment storage. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the room, and Sarah's flashlight cut through the gloom as she swept it across the space. Metal shelving units lined the walls, most of them empty or holding obsolete equipment. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. Then she heard it, a soft whimpering sound, barely audible over the station's ambient noise. Sarah froze, listening intently. The sound came again from somewhere behind a bank of old atmospheric processors. She moved carefully toward the noise, her engineering instincts warring with basic human curiosity. What she found behind the equipment made her breath catch in her throat. A creature lay curled in the narrow space between 2 massive processors, its body pressed against the warm metal housing. At first glance, it looked like a wolf, but as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the shadows, she could see the differences. The creature was larger than any Earth wolf, easily the size of a small horse. Its fur was a deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb light, and when it lifted its head to look at her, she saw eyes that held far too much intelligence for any animal. The creature's ribs showed starkly beneath its coat, and Sarah realized with a shock that it was severely malnourished. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and it barely seemed to have the strength to lift its head. When their eyes met, Sarah saw something that broke her heart. Resignation. This was a being that had given up. Sarah slowly lowered herself to a sitting position, making herself smaller and less threatening. She had read about the Caliph during her orientation briefings. They were a proud warrior species from the Outer Rim territories, known for their fierce independence and complex pack hierarchies. What she couldn't understand was how one of them had ended up hidden away in the maintenance tunnels, apparently forgotten by everyone on the station. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Caliph's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but it didn't move otherwise. Sarah could see now that this was a female, probably young based on her size. The creature's breathing was so shallow that Sarah wondered if she was dying. She activated her communicator, checking the station's personnel records. According to the files, there were 12 Caliph researchers assigned to the Harmony Project, all working in the xenopsychology department. Sarah scrolled through the names and photos, looking for a match. When she found it, her heart sank. Zarath Envar, age 23 standard years, listed as a junior researcher specializing in cross-species emotional communication. The photo showed a vibrant young Caliph with bright, intelligent eyes and a confident posture. The creature before her now was a shadow of that being. Sarah checked the personnel logs more carefully and found the entry she was looking for. 3 months ago, Zarath had been involved in an incident during a research session. The official report was vague, mentioning cultural miscommunication and temporary suspension pending review. Since then, there had been no further entries about her status or whereabouts. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. Somehow, this young researcher had been cast out from her pack and forgotten by the station administration. In Kalith culture, being exiled from one's pack was considered a fate worse than death. Cut off from the social bonds that defined their existence, most Kalith simply wasted away. Sarah looked at Zarath again, seeing the situation with new understanding. The young Caliph hadn't just been hiding in the maintenance tunnels, she had been slowly dying of heartbreak and isolation. The power fluctuations Sarah had been tracking were probably caused by Zarath's attempts to stay warm against the heating elements of the processors. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What did they do to you?" Zarath's eyes focused on her with what seemed like tremendous effort. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of hope in those intelligent blue eyes, but it faded quickly. The Caliph closed her eyes and lowered her head back to the deck, as if even that small interaction had exhausted her. Sarah's mind raced through the options. The proper procedure would be to contact station security and have them handle the situation. But she had read enough about Caliph psychology to know that official intervention would likely be seen as just another rejection. Zarath needed pack bonds, not bureaucracy. She made a decision that would have seemed crazy to anyone who knew her practical, by-the-book approach to engineering. She was going to help this abandoned soul, regulations be damned. First, though, she needed to understand what had happened. Sarah stood carefully, not wanting to startle Zarath, and activated her personal access terminal. It took some creative searching through the station's records, but eventually she found the incident reports from 3 months ago. The story that emerged was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Zarath had been working on a project to map emotional resonance patterns between different species. During a session with a human volunteer, something had gone wrong. The human had experienced what the report termed severe emotional distress, though it didn't specify the nature of that distress. The Kalith research team had been furious. In their culture, causing emotional harm to someone under your care was one of the gravest sins possible. They had immediately expelled Zarath from their research pack, refusing to listen to her explanations or conduct any kind of investigation. To them, the fact that harm had occurred was enough to justify exile. The station administration had tried to intervene, but they had underestimated the depth of Kalith cultural responses to such situations. When the other Kalith researchers made it clear that they would all leave if Zarath remained part of the project, the administration had chosen the path of least resistance. They had simply removed Zarath from the active personnel roster, apparently assuming she would either leave the station or sort out the situation herself. What they hadn't understood was that for a young Caliph with no other pack bonds, exile wasn't just social death, it was often literal death. Without the emotional support of her pack, Zarath had lost the will to eat, to care for herself, to continue living. She had retreated to the one place where she could be warm and alone with her grief. Sarah felt anger building in her chest as she read the reports. The casual way the administration had written off a young being's life was unconscionable. Even if they hadn't understood Kalith psychology, they should have checked on her welfare. Instead, they had simply let her disappear into the station's infrastructure. She looked back at Zarath, who was watching her with those two intelligent eyes. Even in her weakened state, There was something dignified about the way she held herself. This was not a creature that deserved to die alone and forgotten. "I don't know what really happened 3 months ago," Sarah said quietly, "but I know that nobody deserves this. Nobody deserves to be abandoned." She slowly reached into her pack and pulled out her emergency ration bar. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She broke off a piece and offered it to Zareth, holding it out on her open palm. The Kalith looked at the food for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. Sarah had read about this too. Starving Kalith often refused food as part of their grief response. It wasn't just lack of appetite, it was a psychological rejection of the life force itself. "I know you don't want to eat," Sarah said gently, "but I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to sit right here until you do." She settled herself more comfortably on the deck, still holding out the piece of ration bar. She knew it was probably futile. According to everything she had read, once a Kalith entered this kind of despair, they rarely recovered. But Sarah Chen was an engineer, and engineers didn't give up on problems just because they seemed impossible. Zareth closed her eyes again, but Sarah noticed that she kept one ear turned toward her. That was something, at least. A sign that some part of the young Kalith was still engaged with the world around her. "You know," Sarah said, settling in for what she suspected would be a long vigil, "I've been working on this station for 8 months, and I don't think I've ever actually talked to any of the Kalith researchers. That's probably my fault. I tend to keep to the engineering sections. But I've heard amazing things about your people's work on emotional resonance." She wasn't sure if Zareth was listening, but she continued anyway. Sometimes the most important engineering work wasn't about fixing machines. It was about rebuilding connections between broken pieces of a system. And right now, Zareth was the most broken system Sarah had ever encountered. The hours passed slowly in the maintenance area. Sarah's shift had ended long ago, but she made no move to leave. She talked quietly about her work, her life on Earth, her wonder at being part of such an incredible galactic community. She told Zareth about the aurora borealis she had seen as a child in Alaska, about the way her grandmother had taught her to fix old radios, about her dreams of one day helping to build ships that could travel between the stars. Gradually, she noticed that Zareth's breathing had become less labored. The young Kalith was still refusing food, but she was definitely listening. Her ears tracked Sarah's movements, and occasionally she would open her eyes to study the human engineer. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Sarah realized she had a decision to make. She could stay here through the night, or she could risk leaving Zareth alone again. The thought of the young Kalith dying alone in the dark was unbearable. She activated her communicator and sent a message to her supervisor, reporting that she was working on a complex engineering problem that would require her attention through the night cycle. It wasn't technically a lie. She was working on the most complex problem she had ever encountered. "I'm staying right here," she told Zareth quietly. "I don't know what happened to make you feel so alone, but you're not alone anymore." For the first time since Sarah had found her, Zareth lifted her head fully and looked directly at her. There was something different in her eyes. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps the faintest possibility that hope might exist somewhere in the universe. Sarah smiled and settled back against the warm metal of the processors. She had no idea how she was going to solve this problem, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to let this brilliant young being die forgotten in the darkness. Whatever it took, she was going to find a way to bring Zareth back to the world of the living. The night stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and uncertainty. In the gentle hum of the station's life support systems, two beings from different worlds began the slow, delicate process of building a bridge across the vast gulf of species, culture, and despair. It was the kind of engineering that couldn't be learned from textbooks, but it was perhaps the most important work Sarah had ever undertaken. Sarah woke to the sound of her communicator's soft chime, announcing the beginning of the station's artificial dawn cycle. She had dozed fitfully against the processor housing, her body protesting the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement. But as consciousness returned fully, she felt a surge of relief. Zarath was still there, still breathing. The young Caliph had moved during the night, no longer pressed quite so desperately against the warm metal. She was watching Sarah with what seemed like cautious curiosity, as if trying to understand why this strange human had chosen to stay with her through the darkness. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, stretching carefully to work out the kinks in her neck. "How are you feeling?" Zarath's ears flicked forward at the question, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that might have been surprise. According to her research the night before, most galactic species didn't typically inquire about emotional states as a casual greeting. It was apparently a very human quirk. Sarah reached into her pack and pulled out a fresh ration bar, breaking off another piece. She offered it to Zarath with the same patient gesture she had used the night before. This time, instead of immediately turning away, the young Caliph studied the food for several long moments before slowly shaking her head. "I understand," Sarah said, setting the piece down within Zarath's reach. "But I'm going to keep offering, okay? Just in case you change your mind." She activated her personal terminal and began checking the station's records more thoroughly. If she was going to help Zarath, she needed to understand exactly what had happened 3 months ago. The official reports were frustratingly vague, but Sarah had learned long ago that the most important information was often found in the maintenance logs and technical records that most people ignored. What she found made her blood boil. The incident had occurred during a routine emotional resonance mapping session. Zarath had been working with Dr. Marcus Webb, a human psychologist who had volunteered to help calibrate the cross-species emotional detection equipment. According to the technical logs, the session had been proceeding normally until approximately 47 minutes in, when Dr. Webb had experienced what the medical report described as acute psychological distress manifesting as panic response. But it was the follow-up reports that told the real story. Dr. Webb had not simply panicked randomly. The emotional resonance equipment had detected something unexpected in his psychological profile, suppressed memories of childhood trauma that he had spent years trying to forget. When Zarath's natural empathic abilities had resonated with the detection equipment, it had essentially forced those buried memories to the surface. The medical team had successfully treated Dr. Webb's panic response, and within hours, he had been asking to speak with Zarath. According to his own statement, he wanted to thank her for helping him confront memories that he had been avoiding for decades. The unexpected emotional breakthrough had been traumatic but ultimately healing. None of this had mattered to the Caliph research team. In their culture, causing any level of psychological distress to someone under your care was unforgivable, regardless of the eventual outcome. They had refused to listen to Dr. Webb's explanations or consider the possibility that Zarath had actually helped him. To them, the fact that she had caused pain, even accidentally, even in service of healing, was enough to warrant immediate exile. Sarah stared at the records in disbelief. Zarath hadn't just been cast aside for a genuine mistake. She had been punished for accidentally helping someone in exactly the way the research was intended to work. The Emotional Resonance Project was supposed to help different species understand and heal each other's psychological wounds. Zarath had achieved a breakthrough that the research team had been working toward for months, and they had exiled her for it. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, scrolling through more of the files. "Completely insane." She looked up to find Zarath watching her intently. There was something in the young Calith's eyes that suggested she understood at least part of what Sarah was reading. "You did nothing wrong," Sarah said firmly. "Do you understand me? What happened to Dr. Webb? That was a breakthrough, not a failure. You helped him." For the first time since Sarah had found her, Zarath made a sound. It was barely audible, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh, but it carried unmistakable emotional weight. Sarah felt her heart clench at the pain in that small sound. She made a decision that would probably get her in serious trouble with station administration. She was going to find Dr. Webb and get his side of the story directly. But first, she had to make sure Zarath would be safe while she was gone. "I need to leave for a little while," Sarah explained, "but I'm coming back. I'm going to bring someone with me who I think you need to meet." Zarath's ears drooped at the mention of Sarah leaving, and she curled herself back into a tighter ball against the processor housing. The gesture broke Sarah's heart, but she forced herself to remain calm and reassuring. "I promise I'm coming back," she said, reaching into her pack and pulling out her emergency heating unit. She activated it and set it down close to Zarath. "This will keep you warm while I'm gone, and there's food right here if you decide you want it." She stood slowly, noting that Zarath's eyes tracked her movement with what looked like anxiety. "2 hours maximum. I'll be back before you know it." Dr. Marcus Webb's office was located in the psychology research section, several levels above the maintenance areas. Sarah had never met him before, but his personnel file indicated that he was one of the station's senior researchers, with impressive credentials in xenopsychology and trauma recovery. What the file didn't convey was the gentle warmth in his eyes when he answered his door. "Engineer Chen," he said with a slight smile, "this is unexpected. How can I help you?" "I need to ask you about Zarath and Var," Sarah said without preamble. "I need to know what really happened 3 months ago." Dr. Webb's expression immediately grew serious. He stepped back and gestured for Sarah to enter his office. "Please sit down. I've been wondering if someone would eventually ask me about that." His office was comfortable but cluttered, filled with books from dozens of different worlds and research notes in various alien scripts. A collection of small sculptures from different cultures lined the windowsill, catching the light from the artificial sun outside. "I've been trying to get the administration to let me speak with Zarath for months," Dr. Webb said, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "They keep telling me she's unavailable for consultation. What's really going on?" Sarah took a deep breath and explained what she had found in the maintenance tunnels. Dr. Webb's face grew pale as she described Zarath's condition, and by the time she finished, he was gripping the arms of his chair with white knuckles. "Dear God," he whispered, "she's been down there for 3 months, alone." "The Calith research team exiled her," Sarah said. "The administration just let it happen. They removed her from the active personnel roster and apparently assumed she would handle the situation herself." Dr. Webb stood abruptly and began pacing across his office. "This is my fault. I should have pushed harder. I should have gone directly to the station commander when they wouldn't let me speak with her." "What actually happened during that session?" Sarah asked. "The reports are too vague to be useful." Dr. Webb stopped pacing and stared out the window at the artificial sky. "Zarath saved my life," he said quietly. "I had buried memories of abuse from my childhood so deeply that I couldn't access them consciously. But they were still there, still affecting every relationship I tried to build, every moment of happiness I tried to experience. I had been in therapy for years without making real progress." He turned back to face Sarah. When the emotional resonance equipment interfaced with Zarath's natural empathic abilities, it created a feedback loop that brought those memories to the surface. Yes, it was traumatic. I had a panic attack that lasted nearly an hour, but for the first time in my life, I was able to confront what had happened to me as a child. And the Calith team saw that as a failure? They saw it as harm caused to someone under her care, Dr. Webb said, frustration evident in his voice. In their culture, the healer is responsible for preventing all pain, not just preventing lasting damage. They couldn't accept that sometimes healing requires going through pain first. Sarah felt her anger building again. So they destroyed a brilliant young researcher's life because she accidentally succeeded at exactly what the research was meant to accomplish. I've been trying to tell anyone who will listen that Zarath achieved a breakthrough that could revolutionize cross-species therapy, Dr. Webb said. The combination of Kalith empathy and human emotional resilience created something unprecedented. But no one wants to hear it because it would mean admitting they made a terrible mistake. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind. It was risky, and it would probably violate several station regulations. But it might be the only way to save Zarath's life. Dr. Webb, she said slowly, how would you like to meet Zarath properly, outside the official channels? His eyes widened. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes engineers have to work around faulty systems instead of through them, Sarah replied. Zarath is dying down there. She's given up on life because she believes she hurt you. Maybe if she could see that you're okay, that you don't blame her? Dr. Webb was already reaching for his coat. Lead the way. The journey back to the maintenance level felt like it took forever. Sarah's heart pounded as they made their way through the service corridors, hoping they wouldn't encounter any security personnel who might ask awkward questions. Dr. Webb followed silently, his expression growing more troubled the deeper they went into the station's infrastructure. She's been living down here? He asked quietly as they approached the maintenance area. Surviving, Sarah corrected. I don't think you could call it living. They emerged into the larger space where Sarah had left Zarath. The young Kalith was exactly where Sarah had last seen her, curled against the processor housing with the heating unit humming softly beside her. But something had changed. The piece of ration bar Sarah had left was gone. Zarath, Sarah called softly. I'm back, and I brought someone who wants to see you. The young Kalith lifted her head, her eyes immediately focusing on Dr. Webb. Sarah saw a complex array of emotions flicker across her alien features: recognition, fear, guilt, and something that might have been hope. Dr. Webb slowly lowered himself to sit on the deck, making himself as non-threatening as possible. When he spoke, his voice was gentle and filled with genuine warmth. Hello, Zarath. I've been wanting to talk to you for a very long time. Zarath's ears flattened against her head, and she let out a soft whine that was unmistakably an apology. Dr. Webb shook his head immediately. No, he said firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. I want you to listen to something. I recorded this message 3 months ago, right after our session. I've been trying to get someone to deliver it to you ever since. He activated the device, and his own voice filled the maintenance area, but younger somehow, more raw with emotion. Zarath, my name is Marcus Webb, and I wanted to thank you for giving me back my life. Today, for the first time in 30 years, I was able to remember my childhood without feeling like I was drowning. The pain was terrible, but the healing that followed was worth everything. You didn't hurt me. You freed me. I hope someday I can thank you in person. Zarath stared at the device as if it were some alien artifact beyond her comprehension. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted herself to a sitting position. Her movements were still weak and shaky, but there was something different in her posture now. I've been in therapy every week since our session, Dr. Webb continued, speaking directly to her now. Not because of trauma you caused, but because you helped me access memories I needed to process. My therapist calls what happened a breakthrough moment. You gave me the courage to face the things that were keeping me from living fully. Sarah watched in amazement as Zarath's breathing began to change. The shallow, labored rhythm was slowly giving way to something deeper and more normal. The young Calith's eyes were fixed on Dr. Webb with an intensity that suggested she was hanging on his every word. "The Calith research team was wrong to exile you," Dr. Webb said gently. "They were so focused on preventing immediate pain that they couldn't see the healing that was possible on the other side of that pain. That's not your failure. That's theirs." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a fresh meal pack, something considerably more substantial than Sarah's emergency rations. "I don't know much about Calith dietary needs, but I had the commissary prepare this according to your species' nutritional requirements. Would you be willing to try eating something?" For the first time since Sarah had found her, Zarath showed genuine interest in food. She looked at the meal pack with something approaching hunger, though she still seemed hesitant to actually take it. Sarah had an idea. She activated her personal terminal and pulled up the research files she had been studying. "Zarath, I've been reading about your work on emotional resonance mapping. The project you and Dr. Webb were working on. It's exactly the kind of breakthrough the Harmony Project was created to achieve." She turned the terminal so Zarath could see the screen. "Look at the success metrics. The emotional integration protocols you developed have the potential to help thousands of beings across dozens of species. What happened with Dr. Webb wasn't a failure. It was proof that your theories work." Zarath studied the research data with obvious interest, her scientific mind engaging despite her emotional exhaustion. Sarah could see the wheels turning as the young Calith processed the information. "The research team made a mistake," Sarah continued. "A big one. But that doesn't mean your work was wrong. It means they couldn't handle the implications of how right you were." Dr. Webb nodded enthusiastically. "The emotional breakthrough I experienced could be replicated in controlled settings to help other trauma survivors. Your empathic resonance technique could revolutionize therapy for dozens of species. You didn't just accidentally help me. You discovered something incredible." Something fundamental shifted in Zarath's demeanor. She straightened further, and for the first time, Sarah caught a glimpse of the brilliant researcher she had once been. Slowly, tentatively, the young Calith reached for the meal pack Dr. Webb had brought. As she began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing appetite, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was what humans did best, she realized. They didn't give up on people. They found ways to work around broken systems and institutional failures to reach the individuals who needed help. Zarath was still fragile, still hurt by months of isolation and rejection. But she was eating, she was engaging, and most importantly, she was beginning to remember who she was beyond the pain of exile. The healing would take time, but Sarah was convinced now that it was possible. The three of them sat in the maintenance area as Zarath slowly worked her way through the meal, sharing stories and research insights in the gentle glow of the heating unit. It wasn't an official therapy session or a formal reintegration process. It was just three beings from different worlds, connecting across the gulf of species and culture through the simple act of refusing to let someone suffer alone. Sarah smiled as she watched Dr. Webb and Zarath begin to discuss the implications of emotional resonance theory. She had solved more complex problems than a power fluctuation in Level 7. She had helped rebuild a broken spirit and restore a brilliant mind to the world where it belonged. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood outside the conference room on Level 12, her palms sweating despite her confident exterior. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the assembled representatives from the Harmony Project's governing council, Calith pack leaders, human administrators, and delegates from a dozen other species. At the center of the room, Zarath sat with quiet dignity beside Dr. Webb, her midnight blue fur healthy and lustrous again. Getting to this point had required every ounce of Sarah's engineering problem-solving skills, plus a few creative interpretations of station regulations. Over the past 3 weeks, she had documented every aspect of Zarath's case, building an ironclad argument that the young Caliph researcher had been wrongfully exiled. More importantly, she had gathered testimony from 17 different trauma survivors who had volunteered to work with Zarath's emotional resonance protocols. The results had been nothing short of miraculous. Working in carefully controlled sessions with Dr. Webb's supervision, Zarath had helped beings from 7 different species confront and heal psychological wounds that traditional therapy had been unable to reach. The combination of Caliph empathy, human emotional resilience, and proper medical support had created a therapeutic breakthrough that was already being hailed as revolutionary. Sarah activated her door chime and stepped into the conference room. The conversation immediately stopped, all eyes turning to her. She could feel the weight of their attention, but she had learned something important over the past 3 weeks. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do, and humans seemed to excel at making those difficult choices. "Engineer Chen," said Commander Veltar, the station's Caliph administrator. Her voice carried the formal coldness that Sarah had come to associate with Caliph displeasure. "You have requested this hearing to challenge a cultural decision made by my people. This is highly irregular." "With respect, Commander," Sarah replied, taking her seat at the conference table. "This isn't just about Caliph culture. This is about a member of our research community who was abandoned to die because of a misunderstanding that no one bothered to investigate properly." She activated her presentation display, showing the assembled delegates the data she had compiled. Medical scans showing Zarath's near-death condition when Sarah had found her. Psychological evaluations demonstrating the trauma caused by months of isolation. Research results proving that Zarath's emotional resonance techniques were not only safe but incredibly effective. 3 months ago, researcher Zarath Invar was exiled from her pack and effectively erased from station personnel records, Sarah continued. The justification was that she had caused psychological harm to a human volunteer during a research session. But no one investigated what actually happened. No one spoke to the supposed victim. No one considered the possibility that the pain experienced during that session might have been part of a healing process. Commander Veltar's ears flattened against her head. The facts were clear. A being under Zarath's care experienced severe distress. "In our culture," "In your culture," Dr. Webb interrupted, speaking for the first time since the hearing began. "Healers are responsible for preventing all pain. I understand that. But I'm not Caliph. I'm human. And for humans, sometimes healing requires going through pain, not around it." He stood up and faced the Caliph delegation directly. "Zarath didn't hurt me. She saved my life. The memories she helped me access had been poisoning my relationships and my happiness for 30 years. Yes, confronting them was painful, but that pain led to healing that I could never have achieved otherwise." Sarah watched the Caliph delegates exchange glances, their rigid certainty beginning to show cracks. But it was the human administrator, Director Collins, who asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Dr. Webb, are you saying that the Caliph approach to healing is wrong?" "No," Dr. Webb replied immediately. "I'm saying that different species require different approaches to healing. The Caliph method works perfectly for Caliph psychology. But when you're working with humans, you need to understand that we sometimes heal through confronting pain, not by avoiding it." Sarah activated another section of her presentation, showing the cross-species therapy results from the past 3 weeks. This is what happens when you combine Caliph empathic abilities with human psychological approaches. 17 volunteers from 7 species, all dealing with trauma that conventional therapy couldn't reach. Working with Zarath and Dr. Webb, all 17 achieved significant breakthroughs. The room fell silent as the delegates studied the data. The results spoke for themselves: dramatic improvements in psychological well-being, successful processing of traumatic memories, and long-term healing that had already proven stable over the 3-week observation period. The emotional resonance protocols that Zarath developed are exactly what the Harmony Project was created to achieve, Sarah continued. Cross-species cooperation that combines the best abilities of different peoples to create something greater than any of us could achieve alone. She didn't fail at her research. She succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. Zarath spoke for the first time since the hearing began, her voice quiet but steady. I accept that my pack leaders acted according to our cultural values, but I also believe that working in a multi-species environment requires adapting those values to new realities. She stood up, facing the Kalith delegation with obvious nervousness but also growing confidence. I caused pain to Dr. Webb during our session. By our traditional standards, that makes me unworthy of the healer's role. But I also learned that different species have different relationships with pain and healing. If we are to work successfully with other peoples, we must understand their ways as well as our own. Commander Veltar was silent for a long moment, studying Zarath with an unreadable expression. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested the importance of her next words. You are saying that our cultural standards should be modified when working with other species? I'm saying that understanding other species requires more than just translation of their words, Zarath replied. It requires understanding their fundamental approach to existence. Humans heal differently than we do. That doesn't make their way wrong. It makes it different. Sarah felt her heart racing as she watched the exchange. This was the crucial moment. Either the Kalith delegation would accept that their cultural standards needed to be applied with flexibility in multi-species environments, or they would double down on their original decision. The silence stretched out until it became almost unbearable. Then Commander Veltar stood up, her posture formal but no longer hostile. Researcher Zarath Nvar, she said ceremoniously, it appears that your exile was based on incomplete understanding of the circumstances. While your actions did cause pain to a being under your care, the evidence suggests that this pain served a healing purpose consistent with human psychological needs. She paused, and Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. This was clearly difficult for her to say. Furthermore, Commander Veltar continued, your subsequent research has demonstrated that combining Kalith empathic abilities with human therapeutic approaches can achieve healing results superior to either method alone. This represents exactly the kind of cross-species cooperation that the Harmony Project was designed to foster. Sarah held her breath, hardly daring to hope. Therefore, Commander Veltar concluded, I formally reinstate you to active research status and welcome you back to the Kalith Research Pack. Your exile is ended. The relief in the room was palpable. Dr. Webb was smiling broadly, and even some of the other species delegates looked pleased with the outcome. But it was the change in Zarath that affected Sarah most deeply. The young Kalith's entire posture transformed, her back straightening and her head lifting with renewed confidence and purpose. Director Collins cleared his throat. There's one more matter to address. Engineer Chen, your actions over the past 3 weeks have been highly irregular. You concealed a personnel issue from the administration, conducted unauthorized research, and facilitated meetings between staff members without proper oversight. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had known this was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. However, Director Collins continued, and his tone was not as stern as his words suggested. Your actions also uncovered a serious failure in our personnel support systems and led to a major breakthrough in cross-species therapy research. More importantly, you prevented the death of a valued colleague and researcher. He looked around the room at the assembled delegates. The Harmony Project was created to foster cooperation between species with different approaches to existence. Engineer Chen exemplified that mission by refusing to accept that cultural differences made collaboration impossible. Instead, She found a way to bridge those differences and create something beneficial for everyone involved. Sarah blinked in surprise. This was not the reprimand she had been expecting. Therefore, Director Collins said with a slight smile, I am pleased to announce that Engineer Chen is being promoted to Senior Engineer, Cross-Species Systems Integration. Her new responsibilities will include ensuring that our personnel support systems are adequate for the needs of all species aboard this station. The applause that followed was genuine and warm. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but more than that, she felt vindicated in her belief that doing the right thing was always worth the risk. As the formal hearing concluded and the delegates began filing out of the conference room, Zareth approached Sarah with something approaching her old confidence restored. Thank you, she said simply. You saved my life. We saved each other, Sarah replied. I learned as much from you as you did from me. Dr. Webb joined them, his face bright with excitement about the future possibilities for their research. This is just the beginning, he said. The protocols we've developed could help trauma survivors across the galaxy. And it all started because one human engineer refused to give up on someone who needed help. Sarah looked around the conference room, thinking about the events of the past 3 weeks. She had started out trying to fix a simple power fluctuation and ended up helping to solve problems she hadn't even known existed. But that was what engineers did. They saw systems that weren't working properly and figured out how to fix them. Sometimes the most complex systems weren't mechanical or electronic. Sometimes they were social, cultural, and psychological. And sometimes the best way to repair a broken system wasn't to follow the official procedures, but to find the human connections that the procedures had missed. Over the following months, Zareth's emotional resonance therapy protocols were adopted by medical centers throughout the galaxy. The combination of K-Leth empathy and human psychological techniques proved effective for trauma recovery across dozens of species. The Harmony Project became a model for other multi-species cooperation efforts, demonstrating that cultural differences could be bridges rather than barriers when approached with understanding and flexibility. But perhaps most importantly, the story of how a human engineer refused to let a colleague die alone in the darkness became legend among the galactic research community. It was cited as an example of the human capacity for compassion that transcended species boundaries, the human refusal to accept that problems were unsolvable, and the human tendency to see individuals rather than categories. Sarah continued her work on Station Kepler 442, but her new responsibilities extended far beyond maintenance and repair. She became known throughout the galactic research community as an expert in cross-species collaboration, someone who could find ways to make different cultures work together effectively. Universities from dozens of worlds invited her to speak about human approaches to problem-solving and conflict resolution. But when asked about her methods, Sarah always gave the same answer. Humans don't solve problems by following rules. We solve problems by caring about people. When you really care about someone, you find a way to help them no matter what the obstacles are. It's just what we do. Years later, when young researchers from various species studied the Harmony Project as a model of successful multi-species cooperation, they would read about the incident that became known as the Zareth Protocol. It was taught as an example of how human empathy and determination could overcome institutional failures and cultural misunderstandings to create solutions that benefited everyone. The lesson was always the same. Sometimes the most important engineering work wasn't about fixing machines. Sometimes it was about fixing the connections between people who had been told they couldn't work together. And humans, it turned out, were very good at that kind of engineering indeed. Sarah Chen had set out to fix a power fluctuation and ended up fixing something much more important, the system that was supposed to protect and support all the beings working together on humanity's greatest adventure. It was exactly the kind of impossible problem that humans specialized in solving, one connection at a time.